Just unscrew that. When you break this thing apart, the shim stacks are facing out like this, so you do not want to just go spinning or you're going to drop your shims everywhere. Not a huge deal, obviously, but still kind of a pain in the ass to go chasing after them. So you have the bottom section here, which has your adjuster and all that. So you adjust through this little screw here, and then you have your fitting, and you do need to get to that thing if you're doing a full strip, and that's kind of the problem. If this was a two-piece, you would simply crack it in half and then take the piece out. As it sits right now, you actually have to take, as far as I'm aware, I haven't done it, but as far as I'm aware, the only way to get that thing out is to take off this fitting, jam an Allen key down in through where the fitting screws in, and then press that piece out. So it's not something you're going to do very often. You might be, depending on how long you have the gun, you might never do it, but it's just still something that I wish was a little bit easier to get to. There is an O-ring right there that seals on the piston, so you know, you're going to want to get in there and lube that a little bit. Again, my regulators were both recently cleaned about 2 weeks ago, so I'm not going to do too much. I'm just putting a little bit of extra lube on it because I'm, as you know from many of my other videos, a little bit superstitious. Let's grab the piston tip here. You could jam an O-ring, not an O-ring, a Allen key down in there, but it's not 100% needed. For people that haven't gone through the HPR, you might think that this shim has actually come off the shim stack that comes here, but that is not the case at all. This shim actually does not even fit on the piston, so you will know that this is not a shim that's supposed to be used there. It's also, I'm not sure how well it's going to show up, but it's also wider than all the other ones. You have these 6 shims here, which are actually smaller shims than this one. This one, as you can see, this entire upper section is just completely hollow. So you want what they call the dome section, or what some people call the dome section, but you know, it's that rounded section. You want that pointing up towards the piston. So when you're going to drop that back in, you just drop it. I lucked out and it went the right way, but it's just going to sit in there like that. And remember, you want the mounted section facing up, or technically down, I guess, when it's attached to the gun, but for our working purposes, facing up. Then you have the piston itself. Nothing special, nothing fancy here at all. It is just 6 shims. Come on. It's just 6 shims, and then a really fat O-ring. And then you have the regulator seat, which I now remember the name of. This one actually looks a little bit dirty, so I'm going to quickly wipe it. And then take a little tiny bit of lube on this O-ring. A little bit more, actually. There we go. And then I like to put a little bit of lube on the shaft here as well. It's debatable if lubing the shaft section of the piston is actually needed. I like to err on the side of caution. So once you get a nice amount of lube on there, it's just to put your shims back in, or on. It's 6 shims, but yeah, I'll try to explain it a little bit better. You want when you put this first one on, you want the mounted section up, just like in that other regulator. You want it up. So, you know, you want it to be facing this way. That's the way it goes with all the things in this HPR. When you're putting in the shim here, you want it down like that. When you're putting it on this piston section, you want it down. And then when you're putting on your last shim, you know, because you're going to have one down and then 2 pairs that are going like this, and then that last one's going to be coming up. So all the sections will be having the, you know, all the shims that you use in this HPR, you're going to have the the mounted section attaching to or opposite of whatever it's going to press up against. So as you can see here, hopefully, line it up a little bit better, you're going to have a single one which is facing out like this, and then two pairs, and then that last one there at the end, if it focuses in a little bit better, yeah, it's just going to be mounted up like that. So it's like this, and then two of these in between. So you can just jam this thing back in there so that it sits nice and neat. Originally when I was going to try to do this, I was trying to shove it back down in. It is doable, but this is actually a lot easier. It will keep itself, you know, when you shove that piston in, it will hold. So just stick it upside down, shove it on, and then screw it together. So that's the HPR. Again, like I said, if you wanted to take out that adjustment section, you'd have to probably take off this fitting. There may be another way to get it out. I don't know of it. This is the only other O-ring on that HPR, which is one to focus up in on. There at the top. They don't really need to be lubed, but I like to lube everything. So I put a little tiny bit on there, just to keep it from cracking or giving me trouble down the line. Clean up my hands a bit here. Move the HPR off to the side. I'm just going to remove the macro so it's not in the way. So, now I will go, you know, we've gone through the LPR, we've gone through the HPR, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to quickly pull out the rammer, actually. I think this is Allen key. Oh my god, I got it on the right. Alright, take out the pin and bolt. Unscrew this little rammer cap, and then stick an Allen key down in there and push out the rammer. So the rammer, it has something almost like an almost like one of those regulator seats, which I now can't remember the name of. Yeah, so it's almost like a regulator seat in there, and I think that's what contributes a little bit to its softer hit. Most guns have just a solid metal, a solid metal rammer, and when that solid metal hits the poppet, it, you know, vibrates more, makes much more of a concussive feel. So I think that I'm not going to say too much, but I think that the reason aliens shoot smoother than I would expect them to is because of that design right there. It's probably a part that eventually will be worn down from getting hit so many times, but as you can see on mine, it has very, very little wear on it. It'll probably go for a crap ton of shots. It also has, let me clean that up a little bit, it also has one in the back for a bumper. So I think that's really what gives it its softer shot, because on both sides it's hitting some sort of bumper. There's no metal hitting something in the rammer, or really, as far as I'm aware, in the entire gun. There should be no metal on metal. You know, there's obviously metal on metal rubbing, but there should be no metal on metal hitting in this entire gun. It's just got the single O-ring. I'm not sure if it's actually supposed to be oil or grease. It was not really specified in the manual, so I will assume that you can use whatever you like. I would again stay away from 55 based things, as they are good for swelling O-rings. If you have a leaky O-ring or a problem, you could band-aid it, but I would suggest that you don't, and just replace O-rings and use Dow 33 based lubes. It's just the one O-ring, like I said, really, really simple. There's just not anything to that ram. Actually, I'm going to leave this thing out for when I pull out the entire section. There is another O-ring that goes on the ram system, but not on the ram itself. The back cap has a little O-ring. I'll wipe this thing off. There we go. So yeah, it's just a little cap. That one O-ring doesn't need lube. It holds air without it, but grease her up anyway. Alright, let's take these out of the way. The bolt. This is probably one of the most hotly debated items in paintball, or at least in tournament grade paintball. You know, you obviously have people thinking that the 20-inch barrel makes you shoot longer and whatever else, but as far as people that are knowledgeable and I would say constructive thinkers, I'll say, this thing is heatedly debated. And this is a sweep bolt. Possibly people that don't even know anything about aliens have heard of the sweep bolt. I will not be passing judgment on this bolt based on what the sweep bolt is, and that this little rubber insert here is what gives this bolt its reputation, I suppose. It is said that it makes, at one point it was said that it makes them shoot further based on how the apex operates, because they were saying, you know, as you can see, the rubber's only on one section, and then the air blows out below it. So the idea is, since all the air blows underneath the paintball, that it imparts a backward spin on the ball, because all that air force is under it. And you know, if you think of water or something like that, if you have a ball and then you're only feeding water at the bottom, what does the ball do? It spins. So the idea is sound. Again, I will not be passing judgment. I will not be discussing the groups involved in that argument. Does it shoot further? I have no idea. I have not done any testing of my own. I do not plan on doing any testing of my own, and therefore will not be doing any sort of judgment on that. If you have curiosities about if it works or not, I suggest looking into it, but those threads never turn out well, unfortunately. It's also said that because of the spin, I would assume, that it also makes the shots more accurate. Again, I'm not going to pass judgment on it. I'm not going to say that it does or does not work, and that is not because I'm trying to stay neutral, although that does play a little bit of a part, but the main reason is I have not done any of my own testing, and I don't think it's right for me to weigh in without me actually having done any sort of testing. So I will not be weighing in on that section of it. But the bolt itself, I think, is a great stock bolt. One thing you're probably already noticed is it has two O-rings, you know, one on each side of that air transfer hole. So anybody that's seen a Hush bolt or one of Pootie's modded bolts, this will look very familiar. The reason that you have those is when you don't have these O-rings, like on the stock bolts of just about every single poppet out there, you know, stack 2 of course. I mean, the Creed bolt doesn't have it, the Cyborg bolts don't have it, the Ego bolts don't have it, the Legend bolt doesn't have it. I mean, there's a ton more. I'm just trying to come up with names off the top of my head, but I've never seen a stock bolt have this, where it has the seals on both sides. And the reason that you want these is because it makes the gun slightly more efficient. And the way that it does that is typically when you do not have these two O-rings, when this slides forward in the chamber, that air transfer hole matches up with the actual section where, you know, when the rammer hits the poppet, it opens up the poppet area and it gushes air out through the other section of the air transfer. So the hole here matches up with another hole that's down in here above the poppet, which, you know, transfers air from the body of the gun up through this hole that's in the bolt and then out the front of it, and that's what actually propels the bolt. So when you don't have these two O-rings here, it's not sealed. You get most of the air going through this hole, but you also have a lot of air, not a lot, but some air that's shooting out the back and then being lost out the front, because it's going to take the path of least resistance So that's why most of it's going to come through this hole, because it's unobstructed. But since typically it would not be perfectly sealed on these two sides, you also lose some of that energy elsewhere. So this makes the gun more efficient. You don't get the air blow back out the back like you have with poppets and stuff like that, because there isn't any air to be wasted in that fashion. It doesn't really need to be lubed, but it most certainly doesn't hurt. Typically, I would suggest you use an oil on this. I don't know what's actually suggested, but I would always recommend oil on Delrin bolts, especially. But just Stack 2 poppet bolts, I just always use oil. But I don't have any oil at the moment on hand, so I'm going to put an extremely, extremely light coating of grease. Extremely light. So that's the bolt. One thing that you might be noticing that's missing compared to basically all the other stock bolts out there is it does not have an O-ring on the front. This has the downside of making it slightly less efficient, because again, when this bolt comes into the breech, you know, when it comes forward into the firing section and it fires, typically you would have an O-ring there on the tip that would actually seal it past the breech. That way all the air would be coming out this way. So because it doesn't have that, you get a little bit of air that comes up the feed neck, but it's really, really not that much. You lose a lot more through with the air transfer section than in the front. And I know a lot of people that actually have bolts that are supposed to have O-rings there that play fine without those O-rings. They don't use them at all. So you know, it's really not an issue. Other guns don't have the O-ring on the bolt itself. They have it in the in the past the breech section, whatever you want to call it, right there where the barrel screws in. A lot of people call it the SFT O-ring because I believe the Shocker was either the first one or one of the better known guns. The SFT Shocker is the one that really started with that. Other guns use it, such as I believe the Legend has one and some other guns. Either way, this one doesn't have it. The obvious reason is because you wouldn't manage to get it on there with that sweep bolt insert. It just wouldn't happen. You wouldn't be able to mill it down. So no O-rings on the front. So that's the bolt. That's the rammer. I will get into the rammer housing right after I grab myself something to drink here. Alrighty. Now, to get this rammer housing off, you're going to need to remove the two frame screws because you have to drop off the frame. And just so happens that this Allen key also works for this. And that's one thing that when I first disassembled the Alien, I realized that a lot of these Allen keys fit the same stuff. Or not the same stuff, but I mean, they fit a lot more than what you would typically get out of other guns. Usually the grip frame screws are a different size than just about everything else. So it's nice having Allen keys that fit multiple things. And this one's always a little bit of a bitch, just because there's not enough room in this trigger guard. So I hope you have ball-ended Allen keys. It makes it significantly easier. I'm going to slide this off nice and slow. Drop that screw out there. So you have your eye wires. You got the red one and the blue one. And then you have your solenoid wire. That's all that's really going on in here. I'll quickly try to show something here. What do we got? Alright. So as you can see here, this is that spring. It's the spring holder. I'm not sure how well I can show it, but as you can see in there, it has the spring that is sitting on the trigger section, and then it comes into this little plastic part. So that's where that spring sits. As I said, it's a vertical feed, which I think is actually kind of cool. I think that was a pretty good idea. I don't know if any of the guns do that. I haven't seen it before, so I think it's a good idea, and I hope to see it again. Honestly, if they're not going to use a magnetic spring return, magnetic trigger return, I think that it's a good solution. So anyway, I'm not going to pull out wires. So you have this back section for the rammer housing, and one thing you might have already seen when I was up here. Hang on one second. As you can see, you have the hose that comes to the solenoid that connects right here, and this little retaining collar is just like on these fittings, except on macroline fittings, except for that it's made out of plastic instead of metal. So to get that entire rammer housing out, all you need to do is take your finger and press. You press down that collar just like you do with macroline, and then you grab the back end and you just pull it right out. It's nice and easy. It slides right off and right back in, and you'll see really how easy that is when I'm going to put it back together. So, since I'm not removing the wires, it makes it a little bit more difficult. But as you can see here, you got the Noid itself, the rammer housing, its little air transfer hose, and then right in there, there's an O-ring. So that's what seals the front of the rammer, and that's why the rammer only has the one O-ring. Get my view back down here. All right. So you can put a little tiny bit of grease in there. It's a little difficult to get to, actually. You gotta kind of work it in there a little bit. And one way that I've used on multiple other guns that you can't get to things, if you take the rammer or whatever else you're trying to jam in there,